Today on Empowering Workplaces, we are talking to Janet Pogue McLaurin, Global Director of Workplace Research at Gensler, about their new 2023 Workplace Survey report. Very excited. Welcome to Empowering Workplaces, a show for everyone who wants to make work better and more fulfilling. We are your hosts, culture designer Maddie Grant and organizational psychologist Sonia Lucina. Join us in today's awesome conversation. So hi, Janet. Welcome to the show. We would love it if you would give our listeners a little background about you, a little bio. Tell us who you are and a bit more about yourself.
Hi there. Excited to be here. So I am Janet Pogue McLaurin, and I'm a principal at Gensler. I'm celebrating my 40th year this year. And
Wow,
I
nice.
am our global director of workplace research.
Awesome. Well, we, as you know, are very much about data. So we're definitely excited to dig into this for a little bit.
Yeah, and
Sonia,
I love that. Yeah, I'll kick us off. And I loved, it's been so fun, Janet, getting to know you. And I know our listeners couldn't see my face again when you said 40 years at the same company. And so I was asking you so many questions before about all the different roles. And I loved about everything that you shared about workplace research. And that's something, obviously, the name of the podcast is Empowering Workplaces. So it's something that so near and dear to Maddie's and my heart. And so I think that's why when we started talking, we felt this immediate connection with you, because it's just such incredible research, such important research. And wow, I think that all of us have such a unique way that we can shape the future of work. And so to be able to see more and more data, see people's voices and in what they want, what they're looking for, is just so incredibly important. So thank you for the work that you do. I think it's just absolutely brilliant. I had to throw that in as we got started before I jumped to the data point.
Because I've spent most of my career on the design side, and I knew intuitively that as architects and designers, we play a really important role about empowering workplaces for people. But having the data to prove it has just, been the icing on the cake, and really helps our clients make smarter decisions.
Oh, absolutely. And I know a lot of times you might think like, oh, is it just me? Do I just have this opinion? Do other people think about it in, the same way? So when you see that quantified, I think what I love about it too is not only does it often give us validation for our own thoughts and feelings and approach, but to your point, when you're working with clients, it helps them get an even better understanding of what's going on and what are the people's needs. And it gives so much more power to a story, because it gives that critical mass of, it's just not one person envisioning something or an idea, but there's this big body of research showing just this incredible need for it. So I love it.
That's right. And it helps people take the necessary risk in order to really make better decisions, right?
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. And I was just having a conversation with somebody yesterday about, I love just increasing diversity in workplaces and different viewpoints. And a lot of us have had different kinds of experiences. And now even I'm still trying to figure out Gen Z. I think they're going to be brilliant. I don't know that much about them, but I feel like they're like maybe I don't know if I'm old enough for them to be my children, but they're like my soul children, in a sense that I think they're going to shake up these norms. And like much we were saying about other generations, but that they're coming in with this more fluidity and ways to challenge things. And I think for some of us that have been in the workplace for a little bit longer, it's like, whoa, wait, what are we going to do? But I love that, to your points, having some of that data can back up when we're saying, wow, I'm really nervous to do this. I've been in the workplace for a while. We've never done things this way. So I feel like it's risky, but okay, I can see this information and it gives me a little more courage that it's probably, an experiment worth doing and a risk worth taking, and we'll learn from it and iterate, but just love it. So with that, to jump into our first data point, because I know that's usually my role at the beginning of the podcast, and then we start rolling, and sometimes I get sidetracked and forget about it. So This actually comes from your research, and what you found is that 61% of employees say that they need the office to feel most productive in their work, but only 38% of the offices these employees work in have been redesigned since the beginning of the pandemic. So that means that workplaces really lacked optimal spaces for a variety of employee needs. And that resonated so much with me because I was, again, having another conversation recently where the person was telling me, we're losing people to our competition and we're asking them to go back in the office, but there are things that are just not clicking. And we need to do something differently, whether it's a different geographical space, whether it's a different space inside the actual office. So I'm seeing that we saw this big boomerang of organizations saying you can work from anywhere. No, you can't work from anywhere anymore. You got to come in the office. And now they're seeing a little bit of, well, wait a minute. Maybe we can't just have them back in the exact same offices that were there before. Tell us a little bit more around your research and maybe even some of your clients without necessarily naming names for organization. Like, what are organizations doing to really shake things up and make it more approachable for people who are looking to be back in the office, but realizing that maybe the same formula doesn't work as, we were using a few years ago?
Well, we surveyed 14,000 office workers across 9 different countries, and we've seen a very similarity between countries. I think the pandemic and all having to work at home and sending our work to the cloud and having to collaborate virtually, it was a similar experience. And so we're seeing very similar patterns start to repeat themselves in all these different countries. So we see that hybrid's here to stay, but so is the office, because about 43% of these respondents are saying that they have a workplace that is effective, highly effective to get their work done and provides a great experience. But a third are saying they're poor in both. And so it's an opportunity for the workplaces, to meet the moment. How can we design better spaces that actually now start to support the new ways we're working and provide a great experience? Because I think employees need a different mix of experiences and spaces in order to support how they're working today.
Yeah, we found a lot of that in our work. I'm a culture consultant, so we've done some hybrid workplace work with organizations, and they have to really be able to define why people should come back to the office. And it's not just because we say so, right? But when there's so much proof that people are more productive and spend more hours, at work, literally when they're at home, it's a very difficult argument. I mean, people just don't want to come back. And so the idea that, like, for example, collaboration, everybody knows that collaboration is a good thing, but so many organizations have not actually defined what that looks like for them. And that's a big reason, once you can define it, why collaboration in person is better than collaboration online, then you can start to get some people back, right?
I think we're approaching it the wrong way when you have to convince employees to come back to the office. So we came at it from a different way in our survey. We actually asked, what are you currently doing? Where are you currently working? And we found we're spending about half of our time at our company's workspace on average. And again, this was across 10 different industries across 9 countries, but we saw the same percentages in just about every country. And then we said, but what do you ideally need in order to maximize your individual productivity and your team productivity? Those were 2 separate questions, but we got the same answer. And what we heard is that people ideally need to be in the office 2/3 of the week. So if they're only coming in half the week, but they say they ideally need the office to maximize their productivity 2/3 of the week, I have found that to be a fascinating finding from our research. Like, what's holding them back and why aren't they coming back? And so it's this new mix of experiences and spaces. We're working differently. We're spending 43% of our time working with others, both in person and virtually. But we're spending about 35% of our time working alone, and a majority of that time requires a high level of concentration. So we're working very differently. We got used to different types of spaces when we were working at home, but the offices haven't changed in the meantime. And so we're going back to what was, but we're different people. We have different needs, and our expectations have shifted. And so, if for those employers that have started making changes, have started really rethinking how their employees need to work best, they're having a much different success rates of not having to entice people, but providing great space, and they're coming back. And it's not a total panacea. There's going to be exceptions to the rule because we see different cities have different appetites for that, and different industries do as well, because they work differently. But if we pay attention to how we're designing spaces for people and really supporting how they work and what they need as people, as humans, for connection, that goes a long way toward providing the types of spaces that people actually want to be, and they want to be there.
Well, I think in many ways, I'm glad that maybe the pandemic in the middle gave more organizations urgency to ask those questions and do that kind of research. Because I remember when pre-pandemic, I was working in an office and it was an open floor plan. And I've always had global teams since I was younger. My teams were never in the same office in the same place. They were usually in different countries, on different continents. And so I was on the phone a lot. Before it was the phone, then it was, some version of Zoom without the camera. Then it was Zoom with camera, but all different variations. And I remember being in the office and just always being on. But I wasn't in an office. I was in an open floor plan. So it was noisy. There was people going around. There would be somebody coming in, like trying to wave. And then the one thing that really stayed with me that you were mentioning is the moments I needed quiet work time, I would take off my headphones, but as soon as somebody saw me take off my headphones, they would swoop in to ask a question or say hi. And I was like, no, please. I have emails I need to answer. I need to think. I need to go get a water. It was this, I ended up,
you were available, right?
So I ended up most of the time just leaving my headphones in, because that was the signal that people would swoop over. But it was I need a moment. And I just felt so incredibly rude. I don't know how, because everybody was so lovely and everybody would come, usually not with a problem necessarily, with a smile on their face, but I just needed my own time and I didn't have that. And so I think that now it's good for organizations. And nobody asked me that back then, right? It was it's an open floor plan. That's what we decided. It is what it is. And now it sounds like employees are challenging that convention more, and employers are thinking more, because others are also having those debates and conversations and thinking about how to redo their offices. So they're probably thinking, shoot, I better do that as well, so I don't really lose my people to others who are giving it more thought.
Yeah, I think employers are rethinking it as well. I know we work with a lot of corporate real estate executives that are rethinking their strategies globally. Think back to right before the pandemic hit. We were all in growth mode. We couldn't hire fast enough. We were hiring people and just squeezing them in the existing space. We were cannibalizing what few huddle rooms or team rooms we had to put people in them. And then the pandemic hit. And when we had done the research, we published literally February 2020, right before the pandemic hit. We saw for the first time that the workplace no longer worked. It was ineffective in all 5 work modes, because we measure it according to work modes: working alone, working with others in person, working with others virtually, learning, and socializing, which is building social capital and building networks. And all of a sudden, the workplace was ineffective in each of those 5 work modes. So we knew something was broken. And noise, interruptions, distractions, exactly what, Chanda, you were just describing was occurring in the open plan, was we saw it in the data as well. No one had access to privacy anymore. And I think it got too open and too dense and too crowded. And so now as we rethink, it's an opportunity to not go back what was, but how do we rethink something better? How do we
Yeah.
reimagine a different way of working? And
Mm.
meanwhile, we've gotten used to the luxuries for many people of working at home and having more privacy and
Yeah.
using technology in a different way. And other people have struggled with it even during the pandemic and needed to come back to the office because they didn't have a good setup at home. And so it was very, there was inequities in that, but yet there was equity of all of our spaces on a screen. So we need to kind of rethink, how do we align technology with space and with policy in a way that starts to be inclusive for everyone.
Yeah, I do want to ask you about that specifically, actually, because clearly, for like parents or working moms specifically, like there's clearly some advantages to working from home and being able to manage your flexible schedule and take your kid to the doctor, if necessary, and all of that. So were there questions in the survey that specifically applied to working mothers or working parents, and maybe changes in how they're thinking pre
That's
and
a
post
great
pandemic?
question. We asked those, we did 11 different surveys during the pandemic, and we got into really understanding different age brackets of children and what people's needs were. And we saw that working parents of small children, especially during the pandemic when they were responsible for homeschooling and daycare and working full
I
time,
cannot imagine.
know,
My kids
with
are
a different,
high
yeah,
school and college, so they could feed themselves and get on Zoom by themselves.
exactly. And mine were already away at college or off on their own, so it was a very different experience. But we saw some big generational gaps. We did not ask as much in some of those demographics in this latest global, but because we saw that gap between what people are doing and what they say they need, we're currently looking at 6 different US cities and really understanding parenting, actually a lot of demographic segmentation. We're trying to understand team dynamics. How are they meeting? If you're on a global team that you're working across time zones versus a team that you're sitting with at the office, they're very different kind of dynamics and how
Yeah.
you use technology and what you need from the office. And we expect we're going to see some very different expectations that are going to emerge. So stay tuned. That's coming out in probably just another
Exciting.
2 to 3 months. But and we think it's going to be a tale of 6 very different cities, because what's happening
What are
in
the
Houston
cities?
is
Do you
very
remember?
different than the Bay Area, right?
What are the cities? Do you remember off the top of your head?
We're doing New York, DC, Chicago, Houston, San Francisco, and LA. And so they all have very different
Very different.
return to the office kind of dynamics.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we're seeing in our cities pulse research, which is really looking at how cities are responding and what's happening with and what kind of communities do people want to live, work, and play in. We're seeing that the safety of the commute, not the length of the commute, is one of the key determining factors of how often you want to come into the office, which is very interesting. So stay tuned. There'll be a lot more on that.
Yeah. So anecdotally, sorry, Sonia, I'll let you
No,
take
you're
it in a second.
good.
But just anecdotally, one of my best friends is a corporate real estate project manager. So she's the one who builds the interiors of these big corporate buildings and redoes interiors, for offices. And we're based in DC. And she just told me the other day that the city is like, the office buildings are not coming back. Like, people, the owners are not spending the money to redesign their offices, and her work has almost dried up in a crazy way because there's so many great things we could be doing. But she mentioned that the inflation being so high is really problematic for building owners, because they've got people who aren't tenants who aren't paying their rents, and so they're not going to spend any money. Right. They're going to spend the minimum amount of money with rebuilds because they're trying to collect their regular rent. So there's this whole kind of domino effect just through the whole industry. And, downtowns, of course, all the little restaurants that used to serve all the workers, going out to lunch, in the middle of the day, like most of those have not been able to come back because there's just so many fewer people. It's just,
you're very right. I'm based in Washington, D.C. too. And so I see exactly that when we're in the office. There's some places that are open and other places have just not bounced back. And I think it's part inflation, but I think it's part access to capital. And when office buildings were overvalued and they came down in value, suddenly the monies available for tenant improvements that the landlords could start to extend to the tenants to actually spur those projects was no longer there. And the demand, for employees or particular tenants to reduce the amount of lease space that they could take on and sublease part of their space, the demand was not there to do that either. And so it created this stall, and no one knew what the right direction was. So it's like, I may need that space, I may not need that space. So I'm just going to sit tight. But when it comes time to renew my lease, maybe we'll renew it for slightly less, or I'll experiment with trying to give up a space. And I think what most of our clients are discovering is there's many that have continued to grow in this time frame. They had a pent up demand. They've continued. Other projects gone on hold. In DC, we have the federal government as a huge block of industry that's taking a lot of the downtown, and even the federal government, many agencies are letting people just continue to work from home, and they're not mandating or putting too many aggressive policies into place yet. Which helps with the traffic, which makes it a little bit easier to get into from
except
DC.
for this morning when I was
late. There's pros and cons to everything. But I think we're in for a bit of a gap as we start getting the supply and demand and the access to capital back into swing.
Yeah, it just makes me realize
it's to experiment and pilot new ideas.
It's so much more complicated than you think, because I thought, we just need to share more examples of cool companies doing interesting things with their workplaces, and everybody will start, doing the same thing. But it's so much harder than that, unfortunately.
Well, although I think it's the perfect time to do small things and to experiment and pilot new ideas. Just go in and create a small little library space or a quiet tech-free zone, or carve out a few focus rooms or a meditation room. There are small interventions that you can do in your existing space that don't have to cost a lot of money, that suddenly it feels different. It could look different. It shouldn't be the same because we're not the same people. And so we're also seeing this idea that if people are relocating, let's say that their lease becomes available, that you've heard of the flight to quality, going to a better type of building. Now we're seeing a flight to experience, and people are moving to mixed-use areas or a different part of the city. So they're in more of a vibrant neighborhood, and they can take advantage of all those spaces as an extension of their own workspace. And that's creating this mix of experiences that their employees would not have gotten elsewhere. And they're not having to foot the bill for all of it. They're being a catalyst for some of this in the neighborhood.
So there's a light at the end of the tunnel, you're
I
saying.
think there is. There has to be. We're all optimists, right? You get lemons, you make lemonade, and then so I think there is, this innate quality as humans that we have a vision that something could be better. So how do we yearn for that?
So, what would you advise organizations do? Like, what would be your big piece of advice to start, moving things in the right direction? We know a lot of companies are really struggling to get people back in the office. Like, mandate or no mandate, people are just actually leaving. I mean, the whole Great Resignation has a lot to do with that. People, just don't, they want to keep the flexibility and they're willing to look for another job to get that. Right. So there must be some things based on your research that organizations can, dig into and do.
And we all know people do not like to be told what to do. So,
Mhm. Yeah.
open the communication lines and really understand what's important to your employees and try to understand how they work, but what they value. And sometimes again, it's the little changes that you could start to do that have that return on investment. We have found that there's two key areas to really focus on. One is the experience. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm
Oh,
here.
perfect.
Mhm.
I lost the audio. I mean, I had the audio, but I lost your visual. Um, Sorry, you'll have to splice that out.
No
So
worries.
you just disappeared, and my screensaver came on. So I
Oh,
just
no.
want to make sure you were still
Nope,
there.
I'm still here. Yep.
Good. So we found that there's two key things to really focus on to make a high performing work environment. One is, how do you make it effective? How is it functional to really help people be the most effective in their job? And the
Mhm.
second is, how do you create a great experience? And these two things in tandem start to drive, um, not only better spaces, but better business performance. And so thinking about what can you do and asking your employees what would help them be the most effective goes a long way toward solving for it, because it may not be a heavy lift of what an
Right.
employer needs to do in order to create better space and work environments for their people.
Yeah, well, I love that because, as a culture consultant, like that's exactly how we like to approach our work too. Is culture's about helping your employees be most successful, right?
That's right.
So, and all of the different tangible things like how and where and when they do their best work, is 100% like a really important piece of that.
I love the fact that you guys focus on the culture, because that's really the norms of an
Yeah.
organization, right?
Hmm.
That's that feeling of belonging and being a part of a community and being part of something that's greater than you are. And oftentimes coming together physically is a way of building that. And it's hard to do that over Zoom. And
Yeah.
and with so many companies having new employees, they're rethinking, what's the role of the office? Is it just to come together to build community, or when we need to collaborate face to face, or are we trying to create a more intentional and purposeful interactions?
Hmm.
And I think that's the piece that most of our clients are really grappling with, and that's going to then dictate, well, what is that cadence of return?
Yeah.
We're in a creative industry, our Gensler is, and we believe strongly that we need to be, in order to be creative, you need to overhear conversations. You need to see the other projects that are on, that other people are working on, that's not just your project, but you get exposure to a lot of great new ideas. And it could be ways of building, it could be ways of designing, it could be new materials.
Mm.
A big thing in architecture right now is resilience and um, um, creating spaces that take carbon and climate action at the
Right, like
forefront of
sustainability, right?
design. Exactly, of
Hmm.
sustainability. And so, you can't do all of that sitting at home, and you really need exposure to all these other ideas and what we're doing from project to project. And so we're urging people to be coming in on a 4-day a week, realizing that
Oh,
we've
nice.
never been at the office 100% of our time.
Hmm.
The average actually has been only 80% of a week, even back in 2016. But the now, it wasn't that we were at home versus the office. We're at client sites, and we're at
Right.
customer sites and business
Hmm.
travel and co-working sites. And we're spending time both in and out of the office. And so we're just trying to maximize our time with each other and maximizing the time with clients.
Yeah.
And so that's where we are of our return. And I think that is very consistent with a number of other creative firms.
Yeah, definitely. So we're just about at time. So just to close us out, do you have a final thought, of final words of wisdom, and or we like to talk about these topics from the point of view of the organization and the company, which we've been doing, but also from the point of view of the individual and what an individual worker could maybe do as a first step to start to bring up these topics in their workplace.
Yeah, I think as an individual worker, every voice matters.
Mhm.
And it's important that you see yourself in your workplace, and that how you work is there's choice in the office around being able to support that. And I would urge individual workers to speak up. You know, you paid attention to how you work best during the pandemic. Bring the best of that back to the office. It's not an either or.
Yeah.
How do we how do we move forward what worked well at the pandemic and bring back to the office and fix what wasn't working?
Yeah.
And I think when people have ideas, um, teams and employers should really listen to that, because this is how we're going to make it better for everyone.
Yes. I agree. I agree. I love that. I think we're just at the beginning of lots of opportunity to change many things for the better. And
I
this is
do
obviously,
too.
just a big one. But yes, I agree. We all have to speak up. So hopefully this conversation is, one way to get that word out that, this is working for a lot of companies, a good percentage of companies, right? So thank you so much for coming on the podcast with us today. And hopefully we'll be able to circle back in a couple of months and get, some of the new results from your new studies.
I would love that. I think this is just yet another chapter of this continuing developing story.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you so much. And to our listeners, I'll see you on the next podcast. Your culture has changed since 2020. It's time for a culture assessment. Our WorkXO assessment measures 8 culture markers that are super relevant to your ability to navigate constant change. Things like agility, transparency, collaboration, and inclusion. And it tells you whether you have the archetypal culture patterns that might be holding you back. In just a 15-minute email survey, you'll learn actionable insights to help you thrive in today's environment. Get yours today. Learn more at propelnow.co.